The representation in media can be viewed in two ways. The first is the representation of the figure of the female terrorist in popular culture, such as Hollywood films. And an example that I'm going to give you now is that from American Sniper, which was released in 2014. So there's a scene in the film where Bradley Cooper suspects a woman with a burqa of being a suicide bomber. She's a mother. And as he looks through the lens of his rifle, which is shown in the photograph, he sees her with her son. In the space where he decides to shoot her, this woman is not given a voice. There's not a single dialogue, not a squeak or a moan. She is shot and then she dies. Such representations not only reinforce the lack of political agency of the female terrorist, but also further bring about the question of the politics and ethics of speaking about and speaking for such a figure. This is a figure who is then doubly silenced, not only in the representation, but also in never giving them a voice to speak for themselves. The second is the representation of the figure of the female terrorist in news reports. News coverage of such women popularized the term jihadi bride, and several scholars have commented on how problematic this terminology is. Coming back to the lack of political agency attributed to such women, the term jihadi bride does precisely that. The connotation is that these women are infantilized as brides, and that tabloid sensationalism flattens a complicated and necessary debate about political agency. The flip side to this, however, is that when talking about such women as foreign terrorist fighters, some who left as young as 15-year-olds, where do you draw the line between vulnerability and agency? For example, in the case of Shamima Begum, there's a near consensus by human rights lawyers that her case is that of human trafficking. The UNODC definition of human trafficking is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. The crime consists of an act, means, and a purpose for exploitation, where physical and sexual abuse, blackmail, emotional manipulation, and the removal of official documents are used by traffickers to control their victims. The news coverage, however, represented Begum's issue as a question of, should Begum be allowed to come back to the UK, ignoring the fact that she herself has been a victim of human rights violations as a child. We therefore see the conundrum of the figure of the female terrorist presenting itself in Begum's case quite clearly, where international human rights law is actually not able to accommodate such a figure in its legal ambit. Oops. Okay. So the current framework, including WPS, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, needs a new understanding and a new language to talk about the figure of the female terrorist. A new language is needed to characterize female militancy and the agency that underpins it. And yet the challenge is that we must remain sensitive to the coercion and violence that many female members experience themselves. At the heart of this problem is the question of female militancy itself. There is a near universal aversion across so many societies to viewing women as capable of violence. There are also questions of powerful governments and militaries, and we are left with one looming question of whose interests are being served when downplaying or amplifying the nature of female militancy and its implications. Thank you.
Wow. Can you
stop sharing? There we go.
Yeah. Wow, thank you so much. Fantastic concept there. I've never looked at it. I've seen that film several times. Very, very strange to look at it from that point of view. So thank you. Does anyone from the floor have any questions they want to put to Miss or Dr. Gurpreet, as she should be rightly called?
While questions are coming in, I do just want to make a comment. I think it's really interesting your perspective on that, especially when we're looking at how females are represented, especially through the radicalization process on social media. They're rarely ever seen as themselves, right? They're always attached to somebody else. And if they are in a singular, presence, it's always something very not associated with the radical side, right? It's always more like I forget the name of that really prolific Twitter user who would post pictures and romanticize, how great like her AK looks with her outfit and things like that. It's really amazing how that dichotomy works between how females are represented through the radicalization process. It's either alone, but it's very superficial, or attached to somebody else. There's never really ever any representation of a woman going through that radicalization process for her own reasons by herself. It's really interesting. Great perspective.
Thank you. Do we have questions though?
There isn't so far in the chat box. Do you want to add anything to what Miss Amber just said?
I think that is precisely why this issue is so contentious. It's viewed as a dichotomy. And a lot of scholars, particularly feminists, in legal feminists as well, they're telling you that sometimes the answer is not in a dichotomy at all. It's never in an either or. Sometimes it's too messy. Mm-hmm. And this is where the question of political agency actually lies, right? If you look at the Women, Peace and Security agenda, there are actually 7 to 8 resolutions in it. And the one on FTFs, foreign terrorist fighters, that's 2178, doesn't come under WPS. That is under Chapter 7 of, the Charter. But it doesn't talk about, female radicalization as such. It talks about how do we empower women, right? So we need more participation. We need a grassroots level, empowerment of religious leaders, of women participating in these, but no one talks about, there's just no mention apart from the 2242, paragraph 12 on female radicalization. And that in itself is very, very problematic because, like I said, women bears the burden of being the problem and being a solution at the same time, in one sentence, in one paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We do have one question. Thank you, Michael. How does religion play in this? If the figure of the female terrorist is often represented in a particular religion, is religion or even religious fundamentalism also part of the rethinking of that hetero patriarchy?
This is a very interesting question because when you look at media representations again, right, we fall back to this whole, framework of how is it represented? Usually you find a twinning of female radicalization with religion. And usually the twinning almost always happens with Islamic, connotations. So like I said, in American Sniper, you can't miss it. There's this one scene where she's shown with her son, but she's not, you're never as a viewer participated, invited to participate in pondering what the reason may be. She's completely silenced, completely. And that is what happens. And Amber, we come back to, what you were saying, that even when religion is concerned, a lot of times it's either spoken for, the words are spoken for you are represented for, or you're represented about with religion, with regards to religion and women. But the figure of the terrorist herself is never able to speak. And that is what we need. So we actually need a complete complete challenging of the system, a complete new understanding and a complete new language to talk about it. Yeah.
Very interesting perspective. Thank you, Ms. Gurpreet, for speaking with us. If there is any more questions, I'll put them to you throughout the webinar. Okay, if there's no further questions from the floor, we'll move on to our next guest panelist today, Miss Ulta. Conflict and terrorism researcher with research focused in conflict areas, terrorism and radicalization, counterterrorism in field research from Indonesia, Southern Philippines and Afghanistan. So without further ado, I'm excited to see your presentation. I'll hand over the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you, GPI, for having me. And thank you for Amber, who has contacted me to be one of panelists here. Actually, this is a sudden request, not the sudden request, but I just knew that the panel will be held today, and this is midnight in Indonesia, but because I have been a friend of Todd for the last 3 years, I guess, and I think this is a great opportunity to contribute to GCTI again. Okay, if the previous speaker talking about the interesting concept of women in terrorism, and also how the international outlook observe about this phenomenon, I will be more focused on the case in my country, which the women in terrorism, not only women but also children, are ominously increasing in the past 5 years. And Todd will help me with the slide. Okay, first, yeah, here was the family. The whole family blew themselves in the several locations in East Java, the city called Surabaya, and these bombings also named as Surabayan bombings, because all the members of the family bring the explosive. Even the youngest daughter also carried the explosive with them, and due to the children obligation to their parents, they agreed to conduct that attack. The one who highly responsible for this appalling event was the man in the middle. His name is Dita. He was the one who highly radical, and sharing his radical idea to these very innocent children, and also his wife. His wife also helping her husband to convince their children to carry out attacks and blew themselves out of the church area and several places in Surabaya, in East Java in Indonesia. Consequently, there are hundreds of victims, and you can see the picture above them. That's the impact of their action. And I should blame this to the man who bring the idea, but it's not limited to the husband himself. It's also for the woman, the involvement of the wife who who convince those innocent children. That's why I say in this slide that men as imam, or in Arab terminology, it means as a leader for the family, radicalize all the family members, including their children, and convince them to do this appalling action. And woman, the wife with the blue hijab, is also helping her husband to spread the ideology to their neighbor or those who in the same mosque with them. So usually they will go to specific ustad or specific leader. We call it ustad or ulama. So there they will share the idea about Islamic State, and they cannot go to Turkey to pass the border, but they still keen to conduct an attack in Indonesia, and all the discussion happen in the mosque, at the holy site that I think for Islam. But they share this idea, and the wife, it's usually in Indonesia will be separated between man and woman. So the wife will in charge to convince others women who attend that recitation, and the woman will be in charge. The wives will be in charge to convince their children. So during this event, it's involved 5 families, and all of the members of that family involved in this attacks. So they are in one networks, and the networks came from the family members, and their children also recruit their friends to join their movements and to convince others. So the husband, asking the children to doctrinate their own friends that also attend the recitation with that specific ustad. Next. Okay. Here in Indonesia, there are some groups exist that consider as a terrorist group. First is Jamaah Islamiyah. Second is Jamaah Ansarut Daulah. And third is in Bahasa Negara Islam Indonesia. It means Indonesian Islamic State. I picked these 3 groups as models for the cultural transformation, so we can see how they operating by involving a woman as part of their terror activity. First, Jamaah Islamiyah is a well-known groups in Indonesia, and also quite famous also in international networks, because Jamaah Islamiyah has affiliation to Al Qaeda, and some of their members also now detained in Guantanamo. And the groups responsible to the Bali bombings, to several 5-star hotel bombing in Indonesia during early 2000 to 2008, I guess. 2008. And this group still very active now. Interestingly, they only allow women to take care of domestic affairs and continue the ideology to the next generation, children. So they did not allow women to conduct an attack or do the same thing as men do, like trainings or assemble explosive. No, the Jamaah Islamiyah will let the men to take care of that activity, and for women, uh, uh, they need to be staying home and make sure that the children will follow the same ideology as their father, because that's a very important to this chain to be not cloaked, because the children did not convince that this is the holy things to do. That's why the women played vital roles here. And Juma Ansarud Daulah, this is a very highly threatened group in Indonesia, because even though it's not as structured as Jemaah Islamiyah, this group is operated as a lone wolf mostly. It doesn't have clear structure, but as long as you support ISIS, you can be part of Jemaah Ansarud Daulah, this group, and you can carry out your own attacks by only pledge your allegiance to ISIS. And around 5,000 of the member of this group are now in the camp in Syria, because they cannot return to Indonesia because the government forbid them to return, and they also didn't have passport after they chose to give it to ISIS, and ISIS make a propaganda about it that they are now belong to Islamic State and not their initial nationality. This group allow women to gather funds, conduct attacks, support the husband, train others, and be a martyr. For them, the most important thing for this group is on how the action can be can affect in instant way. No, it's not important. Unlike Jemaah Islamiyah, it's very important for them, for the women to pass the ideology to the next generation. But for Jemaah Ansarud Daulah, they want the instant effects of their group's activity, carry out bombings and train others women to be martyrs, and carry out the attacks even though only with the um, knife or things that you can use, like we have a case here that women use samurai to attack police, and they came from this group. And the women in this group also highly skilled to doctrinate people, doctrinate others, and recruit others, especially those who active in the mosque. And the third one is Negara Islam Indonesia, Indonesian Islamic State. It's actually the first jihadist group in Indonesia. And it's re-emerged again in Indonesia this last year, and now string arrests against this group still ongoing in Indonesia, and the police has been arrest around 50 to 100 of the members of this group. This group also utilize women as a recruiter and doctrinator only, but only limited to doctrinate and recruit, but only men who allow to justify all action that women did. So after they recruit and doctrinate one person, for example, and then they have to go to make it legal to the man. If not, and then if they did not pass it to the man, and it will be unlegal. So it will be illegal for them to be a members. Next. this is the example of women in terrorism. Once they convince to this system, to Islamic State system, once they promise by the ustads or the ulama about the heaven that they'll visit after they explode themselves, they will be highly loyal and will keep their promise, and will very difficult for them to be what's so called the radicalized. This is Sibolga bombings in 2018. The wife was the one who doctrinated the husband, and the wife also was a trainer for others jihadis, women jihadis, and she blew herself with her 2 years old toddler. And even though the husband already asked her um, to uh, to stop to stop the action, but she go for it, and she didn't care. She believed that what she did was right, and she has a loyalty not to her husband only, but also to the ustad who convinced her to do this. Next, please. Women as fundraising. This is also very interesting facts in jihadi group who affiliated with ISIS, because one of their strategies was women workers in overseas to donate some of their salary to the groups. So the groups members of the group will contact those who work mostly in Singapore, Malaysia, Saudi, even Hong Kong, to help them to raise more money in order for them to survive, to buy weapons, and to buy materials for explosive. And those women came to do that because they think that this is the way for them to fulfill their jihad intention, because they cannot do it directly. I mean, directly by by conduct an attack, because maybe the securities are very strict in the country she work. That's why they think to have others, or they call brother, to deliver Islamic State message to the government. They can do it by the donating some funds from their salary. So this is next, please. This is some facts about women in terrorism for Indonesian cases, because I learned this from my research regarding the women and children who involved in terrorism. First, the women's highly radical. Is very difficult for them to reintegrate with the society, because they think they still able to live under Sharia law in the Islamic State. They are very loyal to the ideology. Like the example that I gave previously, that the wife didn't want to listen to her husband. He listened to the ustad. Ustad means the ideology that she follow. So also the women is easily disguise their their movement, and effective tools, I call tools, because I think GAD think the women as a tool for them for attacks, and they are effective indoctrination toward children and others, and good agent for fundraising, and easily influence other, because they're using personal approach and they will get close to someone and understand the people difficulties, and there they can influence that people. Okay, so that's the case for Indonesia. I think that's how I can contribute to this panel, and I hope from Indonesian cases we can elaborate more about the study on women in terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Ulta, for your time and your presentation. And actually, something a part of the world that I'm not too au fait with this subject. So it was really interesting to look at it from an Indonesian perspective. Me myself, I kind of focus on the Levant area, Lebanon and Hamas and these sorts of things. So it was really nice to look at something from a geopolitical part of the world that I don't know about. So really cool. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the floor for Miss Ulta on her presentation?
I didn't see any questions in the chat, but I think it's interesting that all of these terrorist and extremist groups tend, in regards to women, tend to follow that very domestic, type, right? Women take care of the kids. The women have to make sure that the kids follow in the ideology steps of, the parents, and that's really their main role. And I, through these, is that's essentially what they're there for, right? Is to continue that path from generation to generation, just like any other traits or traditions are passed down in families, from grandparents to parents to kids to grandkids, is that they're following that same type of, ideology. And that can be seen, across the board. I think it's really interesting to highlight that in those different groups in Indonesia. It was really interesting. Thank you.
Do you think, may I just bring Dr. Gurpreet back into this as well now, having watched that, where the facts about these women are that they're loyal to their belief and everything like that. Have you found that, because when you said that the woman in the film and the sort of pop culture and movie culture and stuff like that, this woman's silenced, do you know what I'm trying to say? Does that refute what you said, or is it the other way around, or do we not know, or is it just another theory, or what do you think?
Part of it, like I said, this is a conundrum. The figure herself is such a huge conundrum, because exactly as you're saying, this presentation has shown that, she inflicts violence, right? But then the other way is also true. And this is part of, I think, answering one of the questions in the chat, that a lot of women, what you are not getting is, you're telling me how, you're showing how. So how they're indoctrinated, how this happens, right? There's this, how they indoctrinate then their husbands, how she bombs. The question is why? The question is why? And this is what I'm talking about, that the political agency is never, ever attributed to these women. Everyone speaks for them. Everyone infers a why. So if it's ISIS or it's Al-Qaeda, earlier generation studies that have been done, ISIS with online platforms, everyone pieces together a second-hand information. So we have got women's blogs, we've got women's Twitter accounts, we've got women showing that, ISIS is like this, Jannat, the Jannah as they call it, that, it's so romantic. And I think there was a Twitter account that went viral showing the sunset with some heart-shaped thing, and it was on The Beak as well, that featured that. The Beak is ISIS magazine, right? But you are not getting female terrorist standing there and saying, this is my reason. Now, part of that can be refuted by saying that, oh, there are scholarly studies that have come out where we have interviewed foreign terrorist fighters, right? My question again is, when you're interviewing them, there's always an element of someone is observing them. So if you're doing an interview under controlled conditions where this female terrorist is a detainee, and you obtain the correct procedures and you go into this detained cell where she's given the permission to come and sit in the interview, and the interview is being recorded, right? Typically you will not say things that are not politically correct or not people don't want to hear. It's in audience reception theories, there's a term for it where when you change your responses when you're being observed. So how much of that gets filtered in when these FTFs are interviewed, when they're being observed and interviewed and they're recording and everything is being recorded, right? So with females, this becomes particularly contentious. And the frameworks that are laid out are very, very male-oriented. So how do you reconcile this inherent dichotomy that exists? That is, the question of why.
It's interesting because when I was watching Miss Ulta presenting then, one thing that stuck out was, these women are loyal to their beliefs. I can't remember the exact wording. And the first question as a critical thinker is why? What's made her? Is it because it's, as Miss Ulta said, it's carried on through the children, it's generational? Is it from that young age? Or is it something else like patriarchy or whatever it may be? So I just wanted to bring you in on that anyway. So yeah, it was an interesting perspective. I enjoyed that presentation. Thank you.
Can I just add in, Stuart? One of the things that is really missing from these reports, these policy issues, is the question of class, right? So it's something that I've been wanting to talk, but I never got the chance. So the way a well-educated, higher class woman, say a doctor or a lawyer, presents her dissent is going to be very different from a woman who is of a lower class and doesn't have access to resources. So part of the questions that, when you start answering that, okay, when Ms. Alta was presenting and, you look at why they're loyal, why? Part of it is also structural violations that these women experience in their own societies. But many policy reports actually don't bring that forth. We are stuck with these dichotomies that happen. Yeah.
If I can just jump back a little bit, because you said something that was really, really interesting about the perception, right, of how we talk and how we present our ideas, especially when we are being watched. I think that an area that is not given due respect is that when women do talk about why they're choosing to be a part of this organization or that organization, it's not held at the same standard as a man citing his reasons. And I think that a lot of that can be attributed to because women are seen, especially in these types of organizations, as more submissive. Is that really what they think, or is that what they're being told to say? So we can never really tell, at least on the surface, if what they're saying is true to themselves. So I think that adds another layer to that complicated mesh of why, because we can't tell. We can, when an individual who's a male stands up and says, this is why I'm doing it, it's taken at face value. But a woman, she never is. It's a very interesting point.
It's been really enjoying these presentations tonight. Miss Ulta, thank you so much. There aren't any questions in the chat, but if there are, I'll put them to you as the course of the webinar goes on. Thank you so much.
Stuart, I believe there was one from Heather that says, does religious oppression of women play a large role in the radicalization of women? There was one question. I'm not sure who that was to.
Yeah, I think Ms. Gurpreet, did you answer that already?
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I did, and she messaged me for thanking me for the clarification. So yeah, done.
Oh, hang on a second. I'm not sure if this is a question or not. In my experience in conflict areas in Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia, and the MENA region, I saw great power in the female head of the household. Most of these families were not wealthy or educated. The power I saw was different than what the tribal leaders had, but it was power and control. Does anybody want to weigh in on this, Miss Ulta? Or
I think it's a question of de jure and de facto. So de jure is, something can exist, but may not be practiced in reality. And de facto is something may not be law or legislated, but is commonly accepted and it is practiced in reality. So one example I'll give you are matriarchal households in Kerala, in India. So when children are born, they carry the mother's surname. And typically, the family house is inherited by the daughters. This is the de jure, that this is what happens. But Indian society is very patriarchal. So de facto practice is that it almost never happens. Patriarchy is there. It is a very rare case where even in matriarchal lineage and societies, the property is passed to the daughter. That almost never happens. Never happens. So there are a lot of tribal societies that might have female leaders, female heads, but in practice, it is a very, very tenuous area where you are actually subsuming a lot of it under, and still the patriarchal norms kind of apply. So yeah.
Yes, if I may add something else.
absolutely.
Yeah, the things that I observe in Indonesian cases, several of cases showing that it is not only a matter of education, also the rate of the income of the family. Because the picture that I just showed you, that was quite middle to high income family, and they both of the parents were quite in a good shape of education. And even there was a case that a family sell their house for quite expensive in order to support a group. I think what's a really powerful, more than patriarchal structure in Indonesian culture, because we also quite patriarchy here. There was the power of the power of the charismatic leaders who able to convince them about the perspective or interpretation of that leaders thing about the Quran, about things that the ustads, the leaders, promising them a heaven that they think it's a real thing, and they can achieve it by killing someone who opposed them. That's why those families were blew themselves in front of the church. I think one thing that quite powerful to push this terrorists was the verses in the Quran that misinterpret or self-interpret by quite highly charismatic leader. So they are convinced, just like the case that, if you remember about the case, and I forgot that case, who drink a cyanida and around 900 people died. It's in US. I forgot that case, but that's also about the cleric that followed by around 1,000 of people, and they moved to the new village that they think they will find the heaven there and they can be free from the government. That's quite a historic one. And that's also the same case with the radicalization, because they also have that radical belief that this leader, the charismatic one, is the one that they have to follow for them to get the path to the heaven, like that. Things that quite good explained in the Quran about how good heaven is, like that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your questions and input from the floor. And yeah, I'm really, what a great evening so far. We've just had Miss Ella join us, so I'm going to move swiftly on and introduce Miss Ella, who is our current Chief Legal Officer and Director of Communications for the GCTI. She's also the Editor-in-Chief for the GCTI e-magazine, The Analyst. Miss Ella is the co-founder of Armada Compliance and a defense, fintech and export expert in the Middle East and the EU. She consults on AML in cryptocurrency and payment industries, blockchain, defense, HLS, cyber, prop tech, drone regulation, EU firearms, regulatory framework, art industry, financial investigations, and tokenization of maritime logistics and real estate. In addition, our very own Miss Ella focuses on maritime fintech, EU jurisprudence, EU banking licensing, and UAE commercial licensing. She also frequently publishes opinion editorials in global financial magazines. So without further ado, I will hand you over to our lovely Israeli colleague, Miss Ella, and the floor is yours. Oh, we can't hear you.
I think you can hear me now. Yes, fantastic. So I'll just, I'll recap the entire introduction that I just did. So I just wanted to thank the entire GCTI team for having me tonight. Good evening from Tel Aviv to everyone. Very happy to be here this evening. And I'm also very happy that we're hosting this event specifically focused on counterterrorism. I'll be focusing specifically on counter-terrorist financing and women and the importance of women in counter-terrorist financing. I have a presentation. I'm able to share it, but it's completely up to you. We can share it, we cannot share it, however you would like. What do you think?
Really up to you, Miss Ella. The other two panelists so far have shared their presentations.
I'll just share my screen. Hold on, let me just
however you want to go, man.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll just share my screen. Bear with me 1 second. You can all see, right? Fantastic. Okay, great. So as a woman myself, and I know how women are treated in banking, I gave a lot of thought to the presentation this evening and how we should proceed with it specifically. The focus that I'm going to discuss on today is actually on counter-terrorist financing and the importance of women within this industry. As Stuart said, I work mainly in fintech, defense, everything that has to do with the high-risk industry in the Middle East and the EU. Within AML, which is very similar to CTF. So we're just going to start. Essentially, counter-terrorist financing is at a crossroads. So I'll give you an example. The mere fact, before we even start on the mere fact. So just for people who don't know what counter-terrorist financing is the application of taking money, okay, and using it for terrorist purposes. I usually tell people that the most basic example for CTF or CFT, depending on the jurisdiction that you are, is that you take white money, so money that is clean, and you turn it into black money, money that is impossible to use because it's gone through everything that has to do with terrorism. Now, up until a few years ago, you could have done it with simple money. What do I mean by simple money? I mean by fiat currency. And this is the old world that we're speaking of, okay? In that sense, we're discussing money that is the regular money that everyone knows, which is US dollar, it is Great Britain pounds, it's euros, it's the money that all of us go to the supermarket and use. That's the old world. The new world in comparison is crypto. So everything that has to do with digital currencies, central bank digital coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum. I'm pretty sure you heard the term NFT flying around the past 2 years, even NFT in defense, which is now a fact that Ukraine is gathering a lot of strength on. So that's everything that has to do with the old banking world in comparison to the new banking world. There's also an issue of emerging economies in comparison to established economies. So emerging economies, due to the fact that they don't have established best practices on how to bank and how to prevent terrorist financing, for those economies, it's slightly more difficult to create a situation in which they're able to continue or maintain some sort of normal banking relationship with the other established economies in comparison. What does this mean? So when you look at terrorism as a whole, terrorists in general always try to find the loopholes in banks on how to make sure that these banks are not, essentially they can't detect the fraud that they're doing within the banks. This is why crypto is very useful for them, because crypto doesn't go through the normal banking sphere. And if you'll join my program, you'll see exactly to what extent. How do women come into this? So funny enough, women have, not funny enough, it's supposed to be interestingly enough, women have a very strong role within this industry. Why? Because not only women can help banking with the proper education that they receive within their central banks, within their institutional banks, and within their financial institutions within those economies, they are also able to create a very hybrid system of, as you can see right now, old world versus new world. If you continue that specifically, hold on. We're also discussing, and I just mentioned the issue of banking and CTF. So because you're trying to prevent a situation in which you take white money and you turn it into black money, that's the most basic example, the issue of bankers, okay, and how bankers treat or try to detect this kind of operations is quite important. And this comes to the, the point of students when they want to discuss whether they would like to have a career in banking, whether they would like to have a career in defense banking. How do you bank in crypto, which is an entire different, type of banking as is. In addition, if you want to continue and work as a banker within a bank, you also need to know that in addition to CTF and counter-terrorist financing, you also have the issue of money laundering and anti-money laundering, which is essentially taking black money and turning it into white money. So it's the opposite, but it's on the crossroads. This is how essentially you have the discussion of CTF versus AML, banking in CTF, just for as a teaser for you guys to see on exactly what we're dealing with here within GCTI, specifically with the e-magazine that's in the layout process right now, as Stuart knows. There were a few articles that were submitted on banking and on CTF, which were given a very great emphasis to that effect. And that is it, essentially. Does anyone have any questions on how we deal with AML or CTF or anything that has to do with banking and counter-terrorist financing in the program? No questions? It's not possible.
There must be some questions. There's always questions at our webinars.
I'm looking for the chat. I'm trying to find the chat. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the chat. I did actually miss one. I do apologise, Miss Shireen. I just saw it after I'd introduced Ella.
Mm.
No, nothing to weigh
No?
in.
Okay.
Find
The
the
question
crypto
from
market
Heather.
intriguing. How do you deal with the 600 plus types of
Okay.
crypto? Oh, that's a really interesting question, actually.
Can I answer? I love this question. Okay, so Heather.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, Heather. So I'll tell you a story that happened to me 2 weeks ago. Okay, so in Tel Aviv, you have the stock exchange. Okay, and in front of the stock exchange, you have the Bitcoin embassy. And the lovely thing about the Bitcoin embassy, I have a question. I see a question from Wally. We'll get there in a second. And the wonderful thing about the Bitcoin embassy is that they try to educate people on cryptocurrencies, specifically on one coin, which is Bitcoin. And to their knowledge, or the way they perceive it, is that you have only one normal coin to work with, which is Bitcoin. That's how they see it, and that's how they treat it. With that said, specifically, you have other coins, which are Ethereum, you have Solana, you have many other coins. You have NFTs as well. To that extent, these coins are more difficult to bank because the tracing of those specific coins is more difficult to detect. There's a company called Chain Analysis, which essentially provides you the wallet addresses in comparison to the coins and how the coins jump within the wallets. And within this report, it's only accepted with banks only if they use Bitcoin and only if you use it from one address. Once you start switching addresses in a mixture, it's not going to work. The regulators currently do not know how to deal with cryptocurrencies as a whole. Within the European Union, there's a new regulation coming out called MiCA. MiCA is supposed to harmonize within the European Union everything that has to do with stable coins and other types of coins. This specific regulation has been published in 2020. It's pending implementation within this year. I'm very skeptical that they'll be able to implement it, but we'll have to see from there. Heather, does that answer your question? Yes, fantastic. Wally has a question. Let's see, is it a comment or a question? Okay, so Wally has a comment and a question. I'll read it out if that's okay. Banking was non-existent in many of the aforementioned villages, yet I know money was traded. How does that apply to your theory? Are you discussing money in the sense of fiat currencies, so dollar, Great Britain pounds, or euros, or are you discussing digital currencies? Two different things. Because it's two different answers. Okay, so Wally, I guess he's not able to comment. I'll just give the two separate answers. So specifically within fiat, terrorist financing and money laundering has always been around and it will always be around. So essentially, in that sense, everything that has to do with the tracing or the trading of currencies, that will continue. I think the question is about cryptocurrencies. Now, I'm not sure in which villages you're mentioning, but I do work quite often in the Middle East and certain parts in Africa. And from what I've seen, there's not a place that they haven't heard of Bitcoin. Many people don't know how to use it. That's a different type of problem. But if they don't know how to use it, it's something else. And it's very important to educate and allow open education to emerging economies specifically on this topic, as this is the new banking renaissance. Any other questions?
Very interesting.
I have a question. This is not an area that I'm super familiar with, but do you find that there is more participation by women in one type of counterterrorism financing than another, or where do we see that intersection happen most often?
I can see the intersection happen most often in the type of positions. which is quite unfortunate in that sense. And I'll give you the way I perceive it. I've been in this industry for the past 4 to 5 years. I've seen many women in the industry, many, especially in the new banking industry, everything that has to do with crypto, mainly because there are less hurdles to enter the market. With that said, it's very upsetting to see many women staying in junior positions, in positions of compliance officers, and not rising to the level of a regulatory consultant, or not rising to the level of a regulator. So if you compare a regulator to a profession, he essentially sets out the policy on how to, he sets out the policy. He says what the rule is. The compliance officer executes that role. And it's very upsetting to see that women usually feel more comfortable staying in the position of a compliance officer, not because they're not able to be a regulator, the exact opposite, but because the jump from compliance officer to regulatory consultant in certain instances and certain economies is quite difficult. Even if you look at the European Commission today, you do have women in power. So you do have Ursula von der Leyen, and you do have other women within the ECB, which is the European Central Bank and the European Banking Authority. But if you look at the compliance departments, the majority of them are women, and then the senior positions are usually men. That's how it works, unfortunately.
Thank you so much for your answers, Ms. Heller, and your time. I appreciate it. Really, I love your presentations. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
If there are any other questions, please pop them in the chat. Okay, so we will move the webinar on to our final panelist before we go to our open house and course programs and course leaders. And I am excited to introduce Miss Shireen. As an immigrant over and over again across 3 continents, Shireen has lived the themes coloring our cultural and policy landscape today: migration, radicalization, and adaptation across seismic cultural shifts. Shireen has studied and spoken on Islamic extremism over the last 20 years, with a look at the full spectrum of extremist ideologies over the last 4 years. In 2019, Ms. Shireen grew deeply concerned about the new eruptions of extremism and identity politics, a gateway drug to radicalization. In 2021, alarmed by the normalization and the acceleration of radicalization, she began establishing the Foundation for Human Belonging, I hope I say this right, a 501c3, reframing a new feminine lens through which to look at the crisis of extremism and help communities develop radicalization resiliency. Fantastic. I'm so excited by this. Thank you and welcome to the floor, Ms. Shireen.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone. I've learned so much about our issue today from all of you, especially about cryptocurrency, which I admit I know nothing about. So this is really enlightening. I do not have a slideshow, so you get to just sit back, close your eyes, and enjoy what is essentially a really intimate conversation. To dive right in, my work, how I got into this entire sector was after 9/11, being Muslim, being born into a Muslim household, really having a lot of questions and going through the pathways of understanding the theology, understanding the cultures, traveling, which I'll talk about a little bit as well, to understand how these different groups and dynamics operate and what makes them tick. In 2018, I was previously with another organization. We launched a Preventing Violent Extremism training program. And so that really expanded the lens of extremism beyond Islamist extremism and towards all the different sorts of ideologies. And my role there was really to look at the thread, like what is the underlying thread between all these different ideologies? And what I found with how it related to women was this idea of essentially like sisterhood, the idea of motherhood, the idea of really what does it mean to belong as a woman. So I'll start you off with a little story. Does anyone know of Tanya Joya? You can just raise your hand if you know of Tanya Joya. She is an ISIS bride. So she's known as one of the American ISIS brides. So when I was doing PVE training, she was one of the co-speakers. And so we would be traveling together across the US, speaking to policymakers, congressmen, you name it. And so we would have these really like days to week-long events together. And so we would also be sharing an Airbnb together. And so what I experienced with her is a really intimate experience of taking someone that you see as the sort of iconic, like poster child of like an ISIS bride, which is how the media represented her, which is how elected officials, everyone represented her as the ISIS bride, and then getting to know the person behind that label. And what I saw, what I heard in the conversations is just something as simple as, you know, women getting ready to go to an event. What I would hear from the other room constantly, she'd come in with all these ideas about her time in Syria, her time in Turkey. Her story is quite simply that she married a convert, an American-born convert from a wealthy family. He became essentially ISIS's number 2 for, I think, the US market. Supposedly, he's been killed in action. She escaped Syria with 3 children and pregnant with the 4th. And she's all of like 4'11", like size 0. So you can imagine this image, which is what makes her really compelling to people because of who she is as a person in all capacities. So what I would hear from her is all the stories of her time in what was then forming to be ISIS, and the sisterhood narrative kept coming up over and over again. And she talked about how she really missed that. She missed that element of sisterhood that she had with the women in ISIS, which she really struggled to find in the US. And I could personally relate to that. So as an immigrant over and over again, I found it really hard to acclimate to Western culture because our dynamics of community are very, very discordant in the US compared to other parts of the world. So what I started seeing in her is a mirroring between her life and my life and other women's lives. And so that this figure that became an ISIS bride was not so bizarre or eccentric anymore. It was very, very humanizing. And Tanya obviously can't be here today, but she shared a quote that she wanted me to share with you guys. And that was essentially on this theme of sisterhood. So she shared, the aspect of love for others, what you love for yourself, created a structure for Muslim sisters with respect and regulation of, for example, how the community of women interacted with each other, that she has not witnessed, or that I have not witnessed in popular culture or secular society, which echoes the idea that this is, the idea for sisterhood is very, very difficult to find. And that touches into where we go next. And that is, how do you find belonging, especially as a woman? And how do you find belonging in Western culture? And that's a difficult question, I think, especially after the 2 years of the pandemic, where we've been even more isolated as women. And what I've been finding is that extremist ideologies are very happy to fill in the gap for men and for women. But the lens for women, I think, is largely ignored, which is what I'm happy to dig in here today with what I've seen as my observations. Now, where we're going as a nation, for example, as I think we can all agree since 2019, is we're going towards heightened polarity. And what is polarity? Essentially is a recognition of separation without any sort of reunification of two sides or two ideas, two ideologies. And we're becoming a society that's increasingly polarized. So my definition, and this was my attempt to help communities, again, parents, social workers, law enforcement, how do we demystify radicalization so that people get it? Because we can talk about these ideas amongst ourselves, and that's worthwhile. But until this information gets into the hands of the next person who can identify that their child is becoming radicalized, like, it's not going to help anybody. So removing it from the ivory tower and putting it into the hands of the front line. So I define radicalization for these communities as the idea that there's only one way to be and belong in the world, and that's it. Extremism is then using force to ensure compliance to that worldview, and that could be physical, obviously, but I also argue that it could be psychological, and I think it speaks to some of the issues that we've discussed here. It can also be economic. So when you're forcing people into a certain modality of behavior against their will, and sometimes not even in situations where they're not even aware it's against their will, like we see in Islamist extremism, that is a form of extremism. And I think that's a lens to where, when we continue building out the new lexicon with the new language that Dr. Kaur mentioned, that's an aspect of it that we really need to kind of dive more into, is what does extreme actually mean, and how are the different ways beyond physical violence, like the tick, tick, boom, the kinetic war, when someone blows up something, obviously we recognize that as extreme, but where was the pathway to extremism before that, and how was it manifesting? Now, as someone who's Middle Eastern, South Asian, I grew up in cultures where there was a very strong oppressive element. And what I find here now in our society today is that there are parallels between the way that I grew up and the cultures that I grew up and the cultures that I see developing here. sometimes inversed, but nonetheless a distortion of identity. So what does that mean? That comes up in several ways. First and foremost, it comes up in the gender sort of conversations we're having, and I use that word very generously. It's more like a gender war or culture war. So what we're seeing, for example, is the idea of a woman being replaced with woman, with instead of an E, it's an X, so WOMXN. And that is essentially displaced identity. So what we're seeing is conversations on, for example, transgender celebration, which I personally don't have anything against, it's fine. But when it comes at the expense of a woman's identity, where you're shamed for being a woman, that is where it creates a pathway for an extremist narrative to come in and appeal to women who find themselves displaced now from their own being as a woman. Now, for example, one of my clients is a 9-to-5, like a woke cultural like nonprofit organization, and even in that organization, there is so much frowning upon language that refers to birth, feminine, mothering, and these are very well-intentioned people. So you're seeing how this narrative of displacing women's identity is not something that's sinister. It's just something that's happening as a byproduct of where we are as a culture. Now, cultural war, I would define as a promotion of one idea or innovation at the expense of another, which is why I say it's not really a cultural conversation. These are cultural wars, essentially. How does displaced identity of a woman tie into the systems of patriarchy that feed into ideological extremists? Well, patriarchy essentially is still a form of an ideological framework in some sense. Now, personally, I wouldn't want to be a part of a patriarchy, but I get why some women would want to be. These are systems where traditional roles are still desired by a number of women. So you can reference trad culture, traditional culture, which is very, very popular in far-right ideologies and also in Islamism, violent and non-violent. One of the examples I'll give is of how this appeal to patriarchy, appeal to trad culture is now becoming more and more favored by a number of women. There was, does everyone remember the Florida, Orlando shooting of the gay nightclub? So the guy who supposedly converted or radicalized, I think his name was Omar Martin, was Abu Tauba, who has a very complex history. But essentially, I got to have an interview with him for a couple hours a few years ago. And one of the things I learned about his personal life is that he has multiple wives. He bought 2 houses on the same block, and all of his, I think, 9+ children live within those 2 houses. And he was advocating, again, for traditional culture in the context of at least a woman has, it's not a baby daddy, she's in a family, et cetera, she's provided for. At that time, it didn't make any sense to me. I personally couldn't see the appeal for it. But I think as women, 2 years into a pandemic where the majority of the childcare and emotional labor has fallen on a woman, I'm a mom of a special needs child. I work full time. I now understand why a woman would want to be in a patriarchal framework and why the ideology would then appeal to her. Because as a culture, we're moving further and further away from creating a space of belonging for women and putting them in situations where they're just designed to fail, or they're designed to not thrive, or they're designed to be snuffed out. If not our voice, our sense of belonging to ourselves at the end of the day, it's just not there. And I can attest to that as a woman and as a mother. So we're getting to a point where, especially now after the pandemic, it becomes even more desirable to have a system or structure that is supportive of a woman. And in the absence of anything substantial, in addition to what's already there, the only thing that exists really for women is a traditional patriarchal system. Now, how that also ties into what we're seeing in the cultural war today is the dynamic of honor-shame. So from the Middle East, we're very familiar with the honor-shame dynamic. You could be shamed for wanting to get an education. You could be shamed for wanting to marry who you want to marry. But we're seeing the reverse or the inverse again in the US now. You could be shamed for wanting to be a mother. You could be shamed for wanting to be just a wife. And that's, again, what drives trad culture between the different ideologies. Patriarchy, I would say, is also not enough of a space for women. And this ties a lot into what Dr. Kaur was talking about. I'll give you an example of what the Taliban Minister of Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice in Afghanistan was recently saying. He said a woman's place is in the home or in the grave. And that touches on what Dr. Kaur said about infantilizing women as brides, which is exactly what we saw happen to my friend, the ISIS bride, Tanya Joya, where people just referred to her as an ISIS bride. They didn't see the full depth of who she was as a woman and who she was as a person. And what I saw was immense vulnerability and immense agency, immense curiosity about the world, and immense talent in certain skill sets that just was completely glossed by even the organizations and the media outlets that are trying to quote unquote solve the problem. They still just pigeonholed her in this sort of role, and that's it. So this circles back to how these frameworks, ideological in whatever capacity, whether it's extremist, whether it's culture, are still disconnecting and displacing women from a deeply rooted sense of identity. I'll sort of close up with my experience in Japan a few years ago, where I integrated with one of the Japanese mosques. It was one of the first in Tokyo, and it was very, very like borderline fundamentalist. And they were really focused on creating a new hybrid sort of quote unquote race of half Pakistani, half Japanese children. And so you would see so many Japanese women happily, being segregated in another room with the children, with no AC and spotty connection to the main room where the speakers were. And I just got to know them, and I wanted to know why these women were converting, and what they converted for was not the spotty internet connection or the lack of AC. What they converted for was a sense of community, which modern Japanese culture has completely lost. They don't have that. But here came this other idea where they could be mothers, they could be with their husbands, they weren't isolated for 12 hours a day by themselves, welcomed by a drunk businessman at night that would be their husband. They actually wanted community. And I think when we are looking at CT or counterterrorism circles, we have to really kind of look at a space of where is the feminine lens here. So before we can even give necessarily a feminine voice or a feminine perspective to women in extremism, there has to be some sort of portal, kind of like what's been created here for women who have experience, women who have a perspective to come in and maybe create new pathways for other ways to talk about the issues that we're all very passionate about and have dedicated essentially most of our time to. And I think that's it for me. If anyone has any questions.
Wow, that was an information load. That was amazing. I was trying to keep up with everything you were saying and trying to take into account everything that the rest of the panelists have said, and it's been such a wonderful evening. It really has with all the speakers, but that really sort of ringed it off and sort of, yeah, it was nice. Does anybody have any questions for Miss Shireen with what she's just been talking about? There are a couple of comments there. I don't know if you can see them.
Yeah.
Yourself. Thank you for explaining the polarization of society. I feel it's important for moderates to work diligently, bringing people to the middle and moving forward together. And then our very own Miss Gurpreet has just commented as well. I covered this appeal to patriarchy and turned it as a paradoxical rebellion with regards to ISIS. I actually watched that presentation. That was the one, wasn't it? You're talking about? Yes, absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Well, if there's no questions, I do have one, Stuart, if it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So as we, excuse me, as we talk about this, creating this counter narrative, right, to remove individuals, especially women, from that pigeonhole, as you said, what do you think is the best way? Because we've seen this migrate for community. We've seen that need to belong. And this is not just in terrorist organizations or extremist organizations. We also see this a lot in cults, right? Where it becomes your outward, your immediate community will reject you. So then you look inward and it becomes an us versus them, kind of scenario. What has been your experience as far as the best way to initiate that counter narrative, so that if a person is folding inwards towards their own community that can ultimately lead to, a radicalization of, any idea, or, towards a person. What is the best way for us, or that you've seen, for us to outreach with our communities as ourselves? What is the best way to reach those individuals to provide that counter narrative? I'm not sure if that was clear.
Yeah, and I don't think my answer will be very clear, because there's 4 different categories I'm thinking of. And one is, the first is youth. And that's one of my focuses, is going into schools, going to the core audience, like parents, for example, and speaking to them about these issues. So, because the one person who's going to have the closest contact with a child, for example, which is essentially a girl is an emerging woman. So we have to look at the women today, but also the women that will be here tomorrow, which are essentially today's girls, and talk to them about these issues, whether it's in the context of a school program or a community program or a faith-based program, so that they are aware of the issues that are coming to surface. And I'll give you a really quick example. I went through a huge crisis of identity after 9/11 when I quit law school and decided to pursue this rabbit hole. And my household was progressively Muslim, but the minute I started questioning the religion, they became fundamentalists. And I was homeless for a while because I was kicked out. I had economically devastated, essentially. And that, at that point, if someone had come to me that was a recruiter, they would have gotten me like that. And so if we can make parents more aware of how to have these conversations, how to navigate these conversations, that really helps. 2 is the PVE program, which is an extension of focusing on just the youth. So 1 is having a program for young girls to really usher them into their sort of identity as women, or however they want to define that, without infantilizing them, but empowering them. What does the feminine mean? That would be 1. 2 is the PVE lens, which is where you educate the parents, the policymakers, the educators, etc. 3 is the refugee lens. So you've got refugees coming in, but a lot of times, for example, we've had so many Syrian refugees, Afghan refugees, and it's very, very difficult to get access to these people unless you're with a vetted organization. And then those organizations act like little cliques where they only allow their own people in. When a refugee comes in, it took me, and I was already going from Pakistan to Germany to the US, it took me 10 years to like America, another 10 years to feel comfortable. Now, if in that time span of those 20 years, if someone again had come in and been that charming recruiter, I probably could have been, it's not that these women are so far beyond the fringe. These are everyday people like you and I. So having a refugee outreach program is really, really key. And those can be really simple, like Hello Neighbor is one, where they just break bread with refugees. And it's simple as that. The last is formers. How do you take a former and give them some kind of structure so that like for Tanya, for example, what she liked about the extremist element, she can find in a healthier context. I don't know how familiar any of you are with Jesse Morton. He was a former Al-Qaeda propagandist for the US who reformed and became one of the leading voices in CVE, and he died, unfortunately, last December. But he had a program for exactly that, but it was for men and women. And I think you kind of need to separate the men and the women in that sense, and just have the women program be led by women, men program be led by men, just to avoid any sort of, narratives that might occur. So that's really important too, is to give formers a venue for returning and belonging. I think the ISIS brides, again, I hate using that phrase, but the Shamima Begum, all of these stories are really important to look at, because who these people are. I know who I was 20 years ago is vastly different than who I was 10 years, vastly different than who I was today. And we have to kind of look at the humanizing element of the journey of what makes a person of who they are, especially what makes a woman who she is when she goes from maiden to mother. And these are sort of storylines that are very mythical, and they're in a different vein altogether right now. They're more into the vein of the sacred feminine, but I think these are very important toolkits that we can use within the CVE sphere.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ms. Shireen. I can't see any questions in the chat box, but if there are any, please, over the course of the rest of the webinar, please pop them in there. Okay, I would like to offer my huge thanks to all of our 4 guest panelists today. We started out with Dr. Gurpreet, followed by Miss Ulta, Miss Ella, and then we're closing the guest panelist with Miss Shireen, who's just spoken. Thank you so much to all 4 of you for your time, your effort, and your wonderful presentations. I'm going to pass the mic over now to our illustrious leader, Mr. Todd, who is going to open the floor for our institute. And it's over to you. Thank you. My name's Stu, and I've been your moderator for this evening's guest panelists.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, Amber, do you want to close your panel discussion out before I begin? Thank you all panelists. I have a lot to say, but I'll let her finish her panel.
I just want to say thank you to our panelists who came to have our discussion. This was great. It was exactly how I had hoped it would be: open conversation with brilliant minds. So I really appreciate everybody making the time to meet with us. And then thank you to Stuart for your lovely moderating. And just thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Stewart, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have your voice in these panels. Amber, fantastic job. This was probably one of the best panels we have had to date. Ms. Shireen, thank you very much for being here. I'm glad you accepted the invitation. I knew it was going to be fantastic hearing your story. Ibu Ota, thank you. Terima kasih. Thank you very much for coming all the way at midnight in Indonesia.
Sure.
Yeah, I should be in Jakarta probably in August, so we'll connect when I get down there again. Yeah.
I see here. So thank you so much for this panel and the terrific moderator you have here. And thank you for the other panelists. It's a very, very intriguing topics.
Thank you. Ms. Gurpreet, thank you as always. Fantastic. I just love hearing everything you have to say, even in class. I'm looking at some of your stuff that you're talking to the master's students about. Ms. Gurpreet is actually a mentor to one of our current master students who is working on his master's thesis on a very large case. I don't want to spill the beans because he'll be presenting that live. I can tell you it's on a human rights violations case from some Sudanese nationalists that I'm aware of, and I know he's in the audience. So JD, inshallah, buddy, good job. And we'll talk to you in class. And that's all I have on the panel. Thank you very much. Does you have anything you want to say before you close out the panel and move into the open house?
Thank you, everyone. Just thank you. It was amazing, and I love working with JD. So it's always a pleasure. So yeah.
Yeah, I know JD. Actually, I believe Mr. Rear Admiral Lee Jayola, is he in the audience? He's also another master's student from Nigeria. He's currently taking our International Security Studies master's degree. And so we'll open the open house, and you're all welcome to stay or leave. We're going to record this. It's actually been recorded and posted. It's been live on YouTube since we started at 10 o'clock. And so I've seen quite a few views, and we've had quite a few people here. It will be recorded, edited, and sent out for people who couldn't make today's viewing. And always, I want to thank the GCTI staff. You guys did a fantastic job putting this together. You made my job so easy this time. And Amber will tell you, behind the scenes, I'm actually doing the production, doing everything else behind the scenes, and I just had to let go this time and let you ladies take over, and it was fantastic. I really appreciate it. So the Global Counterterrorism Institute started in 2019. It was an idea, it was a desire to start some online curriculum. You know, even before the pandemic happened, there was what we saw a need. If you're familiar with power and control theory, if you're familiar with this phrase, I'm not getting what I want, or I'm losing what I have, those are indicators that help decide and help figure out what's happening and why people do the things they do. If you're in the medical field and psychology and you understand reactive attachment disorder, you understand the bond between a child and a mother in the beginning and how that bond is so crucial within the first 18 months. And how for a male, it leads us to pathways that are not productive in society sometimes. And so there are precursors for almost everything that happens when it comes to violence in the home, whether you're an adult child of an alcoholic, whether your parents are a drug addict, or where your kids are doing drugs. These things affect everybody in every way. Some cultures don't have this problem. Some cultures have different things, and terrorism is different in different regions. There are different, methods and models that, over the last 20 years since 9/11, 22 years, it was in the beginning about Islamophobia for most people, and we've gotten rid of that barrier these days. At least I feel in some aspects. So the Institute, using a recently released curriculum from NATO, we decided to take that curriculum, expand it into the Global Counterterrorism Institute, and we were just going to build some curriculum and sell it. But what happened was COVID. We saw a need that on a global scale, an international level, that 99% of the population can't afford education. 1% of almost all the population have degrees, either PhD or a master's or bachelor's. And those statistics are that the information that needs to get out is to that 99% of the population. And so with NATO's determination in doing what they were by the evolving challenges in terrorism, after 9/11, I spent 20 plus years in the military and retired, and I really didn't retire. Here I am starting an institute. It took a lot of passion and work from this institute. And so this open house is not just about what I've been through, it's about what everyone here has participated in. We have several programs and several key directors, and with the determination, we don't stand alone. Our master's degree, our master's in international security studies, consists of two separate models, one in criminal justice with investigations and one with international security studies. And we've developed this curriculum in response to these challenges that we're seeing within the last few years. There's more emphasis on radicalization, violent extremism, because we have a better understanding of what's happening. Terrorism is not about religion. It's not. It's not about anything. There are culture and culture differences involved in what happens and how people are radicalized. Even in the USA, if you look at January 6th, the majority of extremists that are happening these days are from incelibate males and females who are somewhat what they portray as very religious Karens. That's not the case. I'm going to dispute that, and I can in another setting. So with this new information, we came up with a master's study that has an emphasis in not just theory, but case study. We turned around with the master's degree and the two models that it is focused on, created several diploma programs that are lower level, that the average person that's just in the either law enforcement, military, or security industry can take these courses, and the emphasis is in human rights or security studies, international security studies. And with that, I think we have a few of the directors, program directors. We have a forensics program that has begun development, and it's still in development. It should be hopefully finished soon. And so we're offering these courses as part of a pathway to even get to the master's degree if possible. With the collaboration of Paris Graduate School, they also have a bachelor's program. We can integrate these diploma students into the Paris Graduate School e-commerce online platform. And there's no need for travel. And the cost is so much less because of the model that we're using. We do have an ESL outreach program that we can tie to any language to learn English, and soon we'll have the ability to turn our coursework into other languages. We're just not ready to do that yet. So with that, I want to open up the open house. I believe the next director to speak is Amber. You have that. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So I am a part of the criminal justice program. We have a diploma program here, as well as our coursework is in the master's, of course. And what we've definitely tried to do with this program is approach it in a best practices way. And by doing that, we're very cognizant that the information, the theory, the practices, the approaches to law enforcement, how law enforcement interacts, investigates with terrorism, as well as terrorist impacts upon communities, law enforcement as well, the human rights approaches to that, because it walks a very fine line. And so we've taken the approach of, this is what works here, this is what works here, but we're very aware that it might not work everywhere. So you can certainly take what works for their own community as a student and move forward with that. We have aimed to include many case studies throughout all of our coursework, and our coursework involves human rights, how law enforcement investigates terrorism, what are those investigative techniques, and then what is the intersection between law enforcement and terrorism. So when we look at these different intersections of community, and by using case studies as an example of that, we're able to demonstrate, this is a real life scenario, this is what happened, this is what works, this is what doesn't. So we're able to move away from just theory-based information and look at real world implications of what it is that we are talking about. And when we do that, we are providing and inviting conversation about these different topics. And I think that that's very important, and a very core part of GCTI is that conversation, and in the criminal justice program as well. The program director is Mr. Muhammad Omar, who is brilliant in his area, and he has really led this program to be, it's substantial. The information, the reading is very, very good. Like I said, it is substantial, but it provides such a great foundation for anybody to look and see what the world is doing and how they can improve their own communities, or how they can analyze and assess what is going on around them and then find their way through their career paths, whether that be in law enforcement or not. So the criminal justice program is, I think, unlike any other program I've seen at any other university, based on that approach to the information that we are providing. I don't know if Mr. Omar is here still, if he wants to say a few words, but that is our criminal justice program, and I'm very, very honored to be a part of it with Mr. Omar as our director. And I'll pass it off to you, Todd.
Thank you. Is Mohammed here? If not, I believe he had to pop off.
Yeah, I don't see him on here.
Yeah. Nope, and that's okay. I believe next, who do you have on the schedule?
We have the International Security Studies program with Mr. Irfan Yar.
Mr. Irfan Yar, I think he is here.
Oh, no, I don't see him as well.
All righty then. So I will get into this. Into the diploma programs itself, right? The criminal justice with investigation that Amber talked about is one of the diploma programs. We just actually branched off to the human rights and policing for a second diploma program that Amber's teaching. And then the international security studies is an overview of critical security studies. You know, overview of old wars, new wars, revolutionary, counter-revolutionary, and military affairs, and network-centric warfare. Technology and counterterrorism, like drones, use of drones. I mean, we're seeing stuff in Ukraine right now that drones are being used. It's not just the old tank battles. If you've noticed, I think Russia is losing quite a bit of equipment in this current fight. So we look at stuff like that, peace building intervention, energy and resource security, business and security, including the defense industry and arms trades, private militaries, and security companies. All these diploma programs are a 20-week, 2-term program. And the costs are very reasonable. We've structured it to where we don't want students paying for 20 years having student loans. There are no interest. We're making this available so that students in countries that are affected from conflict, we actually have one student in Yemen right now who's actually away at the Saudi peace talks. And so he's not been in class this last few weeks, but he'll be back. So we have one student there, and we have a few other students that are also taking some of the diploma programs. I will let the director talk about the forensics. Is there any questions on the diploma for the international security studies? I'll talk more about the master's degree later, the MIS program. But who's on the schedule next, Miss Amber?
Your information technology course.
Well, there you go. So as well as teaching in the master's degree program, which I'm currently the chair, we're running several students through the Paris Graduate School. Mr. Mohammed, Miss Amber, and myself have been overseeing the development of the MIS degree with Mr. Irfan Yar in the beginning. We decided to embark on some other courses to segue. That would be information technology, because it's all relevant. I mean, terrorism is and recruitment by person is one thing, by social media is another. By information technology and the availability, you have to be able to understand how this is all happening. So we developed an information technology course. It's basically an intro to networking. And this course explores the history and evolution of computer networks. Students learn about wireless mobile networks. They examine computer coding in many aspects and how they enhance network security. One of the programming that they learn is basic SQL, structured query language. And in that, we believe that it's a pathway for students to learn if they want to go later into cybersecurity, which we'll be developing that as well. And that's the information technology. We basically take them through computing general knowledge, intro to networking, web, internet, database, mobile device technology, basic data structure, data management tools, cloud computing, practical productivity, Microsoft Office suite, which leads into advanced analytics, because doing research, it's very helpful to have these analytic skills, especially when it comes to doing surveys, reports, and findings. We go through PowerPoint, Canva, and data conversion knowledge. It's to be able to see data is one thing. To be able to import it into a program and use it effectively to visualize things is another method. And so, the creativity that goes to not having what we call death by PowerPoint, there's other methods to be able to create visualization in technology so that students get a higher understanding of what this information technology is really about. We talk about CRUD concepts, which is how to create, update, and delete data. And then we introduce them to online databases like MySQL, Python, and a few other database programming things. Stuart can talk about his ethical hacking course one of these days that we'll be adding. And I think that's all I have on the information technology course. And I'll pass it along to the next person.
That is Mr. Stewart with his Arabic course.
Okay, so beginners Arabic. There's never been a better time to learn Arabic. It's a beautiful language where everybody knows that, who knows Arab culture and Middle Eastern culture. But from a business point of view, from an economical, geopolitical point of view, diplomacy, all of these sort of areas, learning Arabic or even basic Arabic is a massive, massive boost to anybody's career. So the course is, it starts with the introduction of the alphabet. We move into writing, reading, understanding, and speaking the alphabet, how to connect the letters, because it's a cursive language going from right to left, opposite to our Western English way of writing. We learn about the Arabic naughty letters in the 28-letter alphabet. There's 6 naughty letters, so we talk all about why they're naughty. We learn about the harakat, which is the voweling system. You know, in our sort of English language, we have A, I, O, U, or A, U, and U. In Arabic, it's not the case. We use diacritical markings above, below the letters to make the vowel or the sound. And actually, the harakat, the word harakat means movement in Arabic. So it moves the sound of the word, which is really beautiful. We then talk about gender in the language. So Arabic is a gendered language. So we talk about how gender affects the whole language. It affects the verb, the noun, the adjective, everything dependent on where it sits in the sentence or what you're trying to say. We also talk about the definite article. So the in the English language, we talk about how the works in Arabic. Then we move on to sun and moon letters. We look at Arabic pronouns. We start talking about introductions and greetings and about how to talk about ourselves, where we live, what we do for a living, these sorts of things. And then we look at question markers, how, what, where, when, why. So yeah, it's a really, really involved course. It's very interactive. There's lots to do, there's lots to get your teeth into. It's lots of fun. It's very detailed, but in a way that it's in bite-sized chunks, so you can learn a little bit before you move on to the next bit, and it all fits together like a jigsaw, so it should all make sense by the end of the program. Thank you very much. That's the Arabic Basics course from me, Stu.
Thank you. And then I believe our last course or introduction is for our forensics program, Miss Lori James.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, just on the forensic side. So we have developed a very interactive forensics course, which is going to cover various aspects of medico-legal forensics to start with. So our course is quite intensive, and it's going to take quite a bit of work. We cover most of the topics. So we start off with the different types of forensic science expertise that you can actually get involved in. We look at the different types of admissibility under the law. So for example, under Dorbit, what type of scientific evidence can you introduce and what kind can't you introduce and what are the tests? Then we look at criminalistics and the basics and introduce you to what criminalistics actually is. Then we take a deep dive into crime scene reconstruction logic, which has largely been excluded from most courses in the past few years, but it's very important, I feel, to cover it because a lot of the actual deduction is no longer there in our investigators. Our next section is pathology. We look at odontology, anthropology, impressions, fingerprints, and trace evidence, forensic microanalysis, toxicology, serology, arson and explosives, firearm identification and ballistics and wound ballistics, as well as DNA, question documents, digital forensics, forensic geology, and finally an overview of forensic psychology and psychiatry. So that's basically what the program consists of. It's, as I said before, it's a quite an intensive introductory course, and once this course has been completed, the next course will be also medico-legal forensics, but a little bit more in depth, and we're also looking at developing a forensic profiling course, which we felt just needs to be separate from the other sides of forensics, because it's also a very in-depth, very focused topic. But yeah, our development's coming along and we're really excited about it. So we hope to see you guys in the course.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you.
And there's other programs that we're working on. Actually, we have bundles and modules that we're working on. Individual sales, we're just not at that point yet. We're strictly working to finish development within this year of most of the programs. Most of them are done. I think Mr. Stewart also, we will continue on with our intern program, only they will consist of our master's students. When they're done their classroom work and their master's thesis, they will present on the global stage, as we all have been doing on many of our topics. Currently, we have about 120 modules that we're working on, which consist, it's broken out to like 4 different diploma programs, including Mr. Stewart's Arabic program that'll actually be a part of the master's degree, this next cohort, with some introductory coursework. We also have our AML CTF program that's in progress with anti-bribery and corruption certification that meets the standard guidelines if you needed to do refresher training each year in banking or finance. The anti-bribery and corruption training is also available on our website. And so if you go to globalctinstitute.org, and you don't necessarily have to become a member of our community, there is the requirement to make a profile on our website in order to be able to see all of the value that we have in the different sections. Within the last 2 years, we've grown so much. We've outpaced ourselves at times, and things have just fallen into place, and we let things roll as they are, slow and smooth. That's kind of the way we like things to go. So with that, it's 12 o'clock. I believe that was Amber's mark to finish. And is there any questions from the audience on any of the programs that we have? Anything that you've seen today? Now is your chance. We do have some Q&A sessions also scheduled. Any questions?
Doesn't look like we have any questions, but I will just add that as we continue development, I know everybody that's involved in GCTI is eagerly adding new content, new classes. So, if you don't see exactly what you want yet, chances are we're gonna have a program or a course that you're gonna be very interested in. So check back frequently, because we are consistently adding new information, new courses. So it's gonna be good.
With the e-magazine launch soon, there will be I think the first issue is free. It's coming out. I think we agreed to that. There is a small fee on the e-mag because it's a professional journal with peer-reviewed work from our master students. We also will be taking submissions, and I think that information, if you go to our website in e-magazine, there is more information on that. Miss Ella can definitely, if you go to submissions at globalctinstitute.lms.org, you should be able to submit your articles there, and she'll take it. So thank you, Mr. Giola. Admiral Giola has been here. He is one of our students. We also have one of our past students, Mr. Amos Wairobi, who's also here from Tanzania. And JD, Mr. Wally is here. He's one of current master students, along with some other potential students. We hope to see some of these names we don't know as students. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'll speak to you all soon, I hope. Good night.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Good night, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Gurpreet. Pleasure.
Pleasure here as well. Good night.
JP's here. What time is it in South Africa, JP? Laurie? He probably fell asleep in his chair. Thanks, JD. Appreciate your time.
Should you stop streaming?
Hi, Todd. Sorry, I missed you there.
No worries.